In this week's episode of Bleach the Thousand Year Blood War, Kyoraku Shinsui is promoted to the position of head captain, Ichigo and Renji make their way through Kiryu Hikifune's palace, while Unohana's true identity is revealed as she begins her fight against Kenpachi Zaraki. Yes, in case you hadn't noticed by now, the Thousand Year Blood War arc was basically just a sequence of absolutely crazy moments taking place one after the other each and every week, and we are seeing that play out again here in the anime. We're only a couple of weeks removed from the absolutely tragic death of Yamamoto, and just last week we were given the long-anticipated introduction of the Zero Division, and so this week it's time for the monumentous revelation that the kindly, motherly character of Unohana that we have known for so very long is in fact a bloodthirsty monster and the very first Kenpachi. It's a momentous moment, and in my opinion one of Bleach's biggest and best twists. So, how did the episode handle it? Did it manage to deliver? And how was episode 9, The Drop, in general? Well, as we do every single week with our in-depth spoiler review and discussion, we'll be taking a look at the episode through the lens of someone who has read the Thousand Year Blood War arc in its entirety, so there will be spoilers for potentially the entire arc ahead as we look at what the episode added, what it changed, and what it took away. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well to help support me and the channel. And if you want to take that support from me another step further, we do also have a Patreon as well. And I want to say a massive shout out and thank you, as always, to everyone supporting me over there. I really do appreciate it. So, of course, as you would expect from an episode titled The Drop, the focus point this week is the start of that epic showdown between Kenpachi Zaraki and Yachiru Unohana. However, before we talk about any of that, before we talk about the episode in depth, we first of all need to see exactly what they covered this week. What chapters did they adapt into episode 9? Well, thankfully, this is another 4-chapter episode, which, as I've discussed before, I feel is the absolute sweet spot for the pacing of this arc. And in this episode, it once again shows. They were able to stick really quite faithfully to the source material without having to cut much of anything at all, comedic moments included. All of that helps to really serve the earlier portion of this episode and give the Royal Palace the personality that it exuded back in the manga itself. So what were the chapters that were covered this week? Well, we had chapter 520, Killers Not Dead, 521, A Piggy Party, 523, Swords of Origin, and finally 524, the title of this episode, The Drop. Now, I feel like something was missing from that lineup. Oh yeah, 522, love it. That entire chapter is totally missing this week, as well as the first half of chapter 523. This is a major structural change to the episode, to the source material, that I actually find to be really fascinating. I mentioned last week that I thought they might run into some difficulty adapting this spate of chapters because they ended last week's episode on 519. While I felt that was the right thing to do, it was clear after naming this episode The Drop that the anime team wanted the major focus point to be on that fight between Zaraki and Unohana. However, that fight doesn't end until 527, which meant they had at least 2 episodes worth of content they needed to get through. And so this is how they're choosing to do it. They have totally removed 522 and the start of 523, which is all of the content surrounding the character of Oetsu Nimaya, and presumably pushed it to next week. But we'll talk more about that in my predictions, but I just want to say that I think this does make a lot of sense. Where it ends in 521 with the ending of their time in Kiryu Hikifune's palace is a pretty nice and fairly natural cliffhanger for the Royal Palace content, to allow the anime team to move on to what I assume they really wanted to get to, which is this battle between the Kenpachi. That being said, if we assume that this episode was always going to be 4 4 chapters worth of content, then I think leaving in 522 would have worked out absolutely fine as well, as it would have meant the cliffhanger to this week's episode would have been the ending of 523, which is effectively the actual start of Zaraki versus Unohana. So why did they do this? In my opinion, it feels like they probably wanted to get the most bang for their buck out of a moment they know that fans have been greatly looking forward to. And so rather than simply relegating the entirety of this fight to episode 10, they're able to spread it out across both 9 and 10 instead. But like I said, we'll get into all of that a little bit more in the predictions section at the end of the video. So now, let's begin with the start of episode 9. The intro to the episode is the opening of chapter 520, as we correctly guessed it would be last week. Not only is this the start of the material they're adapting here, it also makes total sense as a starting point for the episode. This scene is handled extremely faithfully, basically playing out beat for beat exactly the same as it does in the original chapter, with Nanao knocking on Kyoraku's door, opening the door, only to find a despondent Kyoraku musing over their potential future together as he has discovered, he has been informed that he has been promoted to the position of head captain and the captain of the 1st Division. It's a fantastic moment, of course. Primarily it is opening up Kyoraku to take on a much more active and, frankly, brilliant role within the rest of this arc, but also it's one of the first major steps in showing us how the Soul Society is changing and adapting following the first Quincy invasion. It's also nice to get to see Nanao properly here with, I think, her first speaking role of this arc since the vice captain's meeting was removed earlier on in the series. One thing that I find to be kind of interesting here is that Kyoraku, one of his middle names, is translated here as Sakuranosuke, but I always thought his middle name was Sosoza, and I thought that Sakuranosuke was the name that his Zanpakuto called him when he activated his bankai considerably later on. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. But either way, it is a great moment and a perfect way to open this episode. I've always loved that shot of Kyoraku kind of looking out of the window and just being like, oh, give me a break. It's the perfect reaction for this character now knowing he suddenly has all this responsibility to shoulder. Now, as we mentioned earlier, as we move into the stuff in the 0 Division, thanks to the 4-chapter structure this week, they can remain extremely faithful right down to all the gags and all the jokes, and we see them basically totally intact this week, which I think a lot of people would have liked for last week considering some of the scenes that were cut in Tenjiro's section, but here everything is as it should be. To the point where things and characters that I predicted would be cut show up here exactly as they do in the source material. For example, the characters of Kazuo and Kazuhiro, I thought there was a decent chance they might not make it in, but they are here fully formed and doing exactly what they do in the original chapter. We get a lovely new look at the front of the Kirin Den Palace at the start here as well, which is really awesome, but basically this scene plays out exactly the same. Ichigo is being held underwater by these two guys before fighting them off, kicking his way out of the hot spring and struggling for air as Tenjiro blasts him for not being able to stay underwater for that amount of time. Ichigo's line about how parents only make children sit up to their necks in a bath is actually cut here, but everything else basically plays out the exact same. I will say that as Ichigo tries to fight off both Kazuo and Kazuhiro, I do prefer the more chibi version of this moment in the original chapter. Tenjiro then punches Ichigo in the face, sending him flying across the water before revealing that he has been properly healed. Before Renji then also emerges from the hot springs as well, wanting to go with Ichigo to the next palace. One thing I really like about this scene here is that Ichigo is clearly concerned about Renji here, thinking that he shouldn't be moving around too much, but Tenjiro clearly knows better and decides to test Renji's mettle by, of course, punching him in the gut. And although Renji is able to withstand it, I love the fact that you can see he is barely holding on. He is quivering, struggling to maintain this facade, and Tenjiro knows that, but he decides to allow Renji to go on anyway, clearly thinking that he has been healed enough at least, so there's no need to wound his pride by forcing him to stay. But the ending of Tenjiro's palace's segment is exactly the same here as it appears in the source material. Tenjiro healing himself after Ichigo reflexively deflected his hit and fractured his hand, speaking to Kazuo and Kazuhiro. I'm kind of surprised that they left in Tenjiro's line about the Soul King being so fascinated by Ichigo, because, again, kind of nothing really comes of it in the future, unless, of course, hopefully, they are planning on expanding the role of the Soul King. Up next, the establishing shot we get of the Central 46 in the original chapter is removed here, but once again the remainder of this scene is basically exactly the same. I mentioned in my live reaction that I thought I remembered this scene being basically pitch black, but I was misremembering it. However, it is pitch black when Unohana arrives, simply highlighting where she's stepping with a square of light, and I think that was probably just done in the original chapter for a bit of additional impact. I actually think the way Central 46 is portrayed here in the anime is a little more atmospheric, if anything. But this is another great scene, a fantastic showcase for Kyoraku as a character as he goes toe-to-toe with the normally traditionally pretty hard-ass members of the Central 46. He verbally spars with them and is able to get one over them twice, firstly requesting that he be allowed to have 2 vice-captains instead of the traditional 1, and while they're not happy about it, Kyoraku pretty correctly says, well, I thought it was you guys who stated that captains get the right to choose their vice-captains in the first place, meaning that the Central 46 don't really have a leg to stand on in that argument if it was their law originally. And then secondly, Kyoraku mentions that he wants to teach Zaraki the art of the sword, which of course again they're extremely unhappy about, but I love this moment where Kyoraku turns around to them and without really being confrontational, almost threatens them in a way, saying that without Zaraki's power, we will be vulnerable when the second invasion inevitably happens. Like, it is coming at some point. And when it does happen, will you be able to defend yourselves? And they all fall silent, because of course they're not fighters. They don't want to be left to defend themselves. They want these powerful captains to do the job for them. And so I love that Kyoraku is just quietly like, I see, I've got your permission. It's an awesome, awesome moment, and again, just a brilliant showcase for why Kyoraku becomes such an amazing character when given this much agency in the role of head captain. I always found it interesting that Kyoraku was never sure if Byakuya and the others would return safely from the royal palace or not. It seemed to me like he didn't trust Zero Division to get the job done. Either way, with the megaton reveal of Unohana, with her walking into the Central 46 chambers with that shadowed look on her face, the reveal of her being the first ever Kenpachi and actually having the name Yachiru, we reach the end of chapter 520. We move, of course, onto the opening of 521. It's again exactly the same here as it is in the original chapter, with Ichigo and Renji kind of quarrelling as they're falling from the sky, trying to force each other to be basically the cushion which they land on when they hit the ground, until they both realise that Kon has actually snuck in there with them, and what do you know, Buff Kon activates. He transforms into his massive muscular physique in the middle of the air after they accidentally seem to set off his switch, and then they land on him. It is a bit random that Buff Kon is just here with no context whatsoever, since that was all removed from the previous episode, but it still is nice to see him. And also a small section of dialogue, basically Ichigo and Renji discussing how they think that Kon managed to come with them, is totally cut from the episode as well. Again, Kiryu Hikifune's entrance sending Ichigo and Renji flying before making them a delicious meal, a gourmet banquet, is all handled exactly the same here as it is in the original source material. Again, a result, a symptom of the fact that they are only using 4 chapters. A lot of the shots of Ichigo and Renji eating are exactly the same as they appear in the source material, which feels like a nice attention to detail to me, but there are also additional shots as well of, for example, the empty bowls beginning to pile up. But I think I mentioned it in my live reaction, I really like how the Gatonden and Hikifune look in this scene. I love the lighting in the scenes where she's frying up the food, where she's cooking their meal for them. That all looks absolutely fantastic. And the actual Gatonden palace itself looks great. Seeing those luscious bowls of food on the table prepared in front of them, it all looks really awesome. And if there's one thing I've always loved about the Zero Division, it is the variety, not just in the character designs, but also the location and what's actually going on, what we're seeing these characters doing. It may sound a little weird or inconsequential, but we've never really seen these characters engaging in activities like this before, whether it is taking a rest in an elaborate hot spring setting, which we've seen very briefly in the Soul Society arc, but it's kind of cranked up to 11 here, 2 tucking into an amazing, delicious meal like this, like they are ravenous. We've never really seen that, and the Royal Palace ready to kind of open up for all these unique settings and scenarios. Basically, all the dialogue and all the jokes are kept exactly the same here, including Renji's joke about finding some really weird-looking food but tasting it, and it's absolutely lovely, giving off this rambling critique of how delicious the meal is as well. All of this is exactly the same, right down to Ichigo's doubts about whether or not they're doing the right thing. It seems like they're just having an amazing, relaxing party time up here in the Royal Palace, while everyone else down below is injured, tending to their wounds, and presumably cracking on with their training. It's a nice moment, and I like Renji's kind of tough love words to Ichigo here. Although Ichigo might be incredibly strong, there's no denying that Renji still has more experience than him, generally speaking, as a warrior, living that warrior lifestyle, and so everything he says makes absolute sense here, which I really do appreciate. I think it works perfectly well for their characters that Ichigo would see all of this and be put off by it without seeing its true value, whereas Renji, who has lived that warrior lifestyle for longer, understands exactly where the Zero Division are coming from, and I also love that Hikifune picks up on that and congratulates Renji for understanding the situation in its entirety. I also love that Hikifune made food for Kon as well in his small kind of Kon-sized bowls. I don't really know how he's eating it, but I guess if there's anyone that would know how to make food edible for Gekon, it would be Hikifune. So Hikifune reveals her slender form to them, and the sexuality of this form is absolutely played up more here in the anime than it is in the original chapter, albeit I think mostly for laughs. One cool detail about this character is that I think her voice actually changes as well when she gains her new form here, which is a nice little detail. Anyway, as many predicted last week, this is indeed where we get the title card for Hikifune, which makes total sense to me and probably is a better execution than it was in the original source material. As I've said before, I'm hopeful this means we'll get a little bit more of Senjumaru and her palace, although I do think they could probably fit her title card into that tiny little sequence we get in chapter 545, I think it is. Hikifune reveals the criteria for being promoted to the Zero Division, the fact that each and every one of them has created something that is intrinsic to the overall history of the Soul Society, and her creation is none other than the Gikongan, and the entire process of ingesting mod souls in order to allow Shinigami to operate in the human world. As I think I mentioned, it's a massive deal, and something we have seen used so many times throughout the series that absolutely she warrants her position here within the Zero Division. And of course, with Hikifune seeing them off to the landing pad, warning them about how unpredictable their next host, Nimaya Oetsu, will be, as he is the creator of the Zanpakuto itself, this is where chapter 521 ends. Now, normally this is where we would have chapter 522, love it. However, the anime team has taken the drastic decision to totally remove 522 from this episode, and like I said, I think it works perfectly fine. The ending of 521, therefore the ending of Ichigo and Renji's time in Hikifune's palace, makes for a pretty natural kind of breakpoint for the story within the Royal Palace. But the truth is, I think 522 will make a return probably as soon as next week, and possibly even totally intact. Although, as I mentioned last week, although I didn't know the nature of them cutting this chapter, I did think they would cut a lot of 522 regardless, because it basically is almost entirely, save for maybe the last 3 pages, jokes, gags, and comedy. It's funny, I actually remember 522 being the first and only chapter up until that point that I was actively slightly disappointed with in the 1,000 Year Blood War arc, reading it on a weekly basis, because it was basically just characters messing around for about 16 of the 19 pages, and that was a little bit disappointing. So it's kind of funny to see it completely removed here, but like I said, I expect to see it nonetheless. And so instead of 522, we move right the way through to the second half of 523, and yes, the beginning of that epic clash between Kenpachi Zaraki and Yachiru Unohana. Immediately, Muken is presented in a really unique and interesting way as far as I'm concerned. It looks totally different to how it was portrayed when we saw Aizen a few episodes back. Aizen presumably, of course, being locked up in the deepest and darkest depths of Muken itself, while these two characters have only really just stepped foot into Muken. We see Zaraki actually arriving into the prison itself, so presumably where they are is very much just the entrance to this otherwise infinite black cavern, essentially. So that makes a lot of sense to me that it would look a fair bit different. Or at the very least, this is how it does look where Aizen is, but we can just see it slightly better here because some light is managing to bleed through. But I love the metallic grey look that everything has, like they're fighting within a cage of obsidian or something, like they are fighting within a steel arena itself, which is absolutely perfect for these two warriors who live and die by the sword. In fact, I just love the overall presentation of this fight. I love the tiny touch that their voices are echoing to really showcase just how cavernous this place actually is. I love the lighting, that everything looks extremely dark, black, white, grey, silver, that there are streaks of white on all the ends of their hair, even right down to Unohana's individual eyelashes. It all looks fantastic, and again, another example of the anime really using creative lighting to make its unique set pieces ultimately totally stand out. As Zaraki enters the room, silhouetted against the light of the doorway, he steps into Muken. I have to say, I think he is drawn extremely well. From a pure quality of art perspective, he just looks fantastic here. And of course, that incredible lighting is helping to complete the picture. But I want to talk very briefly about the art in this episode. I feel like it's an episode of two halves. I think the art in the first half of the episode, specifically the Zero Division scenes, although really just the first half in general, was kind of all over the place. It felt a little rough around the edges. But when we get to this second half, the battle between Zaraki and Unohana, I think the episode just looks amazing. There feels like a huge jump in quality. I'm not entirely sure what that is, what's causing it, but I just think this part of the episode looks leaps and bounds better than anything that came before it this week. I will say I don't think the reveal of Unohana's face is quite as impactful here as it was in the original chapter, although maybe that's simply because I knew it was coming. But personally, I would have loved to have seen maybe the back of her head, and then she turns very slowly to actually face Zaraki, her lips crease up into that insane grin, maybe there's some kind of an ominous booming sound effect at the same time. Anything like that I think would have worked really, really well, but regardless, once again, she is drawn nearly impeccably here. Their small conversation at the start of this fight is left basically exactly the same, with Zaraki wondering how Unohana managed to get permission to use Muken as their battleground, Unohana saying that she felt this was the perfect place for him thanks to its near infinite size. He would be able to swing his sword around with as much wanton abandon as he wanted, saying that normally non-criminals like the two of them wouldn't be allowed to step foot in here at all. But of course, Zaraki laughs at her, saying non-criminals, if we weren't as strong as we are, criminals is all you and I would actually be. The close-up of Unohana's mouth, where she agrees with Zaraki's sentiment here, is actually cut from the episode. I will say Unohana's voice actress takes it to the next level here, transforming Unohana's voice ever so slightly, adding a sinister, slithering, husky whisper to her voice that makes her sound so evil, so creepy, but still kind of capturing the Unohana voice that we know. Kyoraku's lamenting of their situation is also handled really nicely. I love that shot of him resting on his hands as he thinks about the ramifications of the battle to be had, how the stakes are so high, how one of these characters must die in this fight, or else, of course, the name of Kenpachi cannot be truly passed along. Really, really well handled. I just think this whole sequence is done basically nearly perfectly here. Leading into, of course, their sweeping clash, which brings to an end 523. As we start 524, the final chapter in this episode, the initial shots of both Isane and Yachiru are cut here. Isane, of course, up against the window, Yachiru coming into the barracks. Both of those shots are removed and cut instead straight to them looking at the artifacts left over over by their captains, Isane clutching the letter that Unohana has given her, Yachiru lifting up Kenpachi's eye patch, both of them considering what this means for their respective captains. But there are some lovely small visual improvements here that if you look at them side by side, you can really see the potential for what the anime is actually able to create. Specifically this shot of Yachiru leaning down to pick up Zaraki's eye patch. It just looks way better in the anime thanks to the additional depth and the incredible lighting on show. There are actually a few new shots of the battle interspersed between these scenes of Isane and Yachiru here as well, basically just close-ups of Zaraki and Unohana moving into battle and locking blades. But the actual sequence that would follow here, the start of the battle between these two characters, both looks and feels fantastic. And there really is some wonderful choreography here that translates over lovely from the source material. In fact, I have always loved this fight. I've said before on this channel that this is, as far as I'm concerned, Kenpachi Zaraki's best battle, and actually in many ways the last traditional fight he would actually get in this arc. But I just think the beginning of the fight here is done really well in this episode. Zaraki bringing down his blade in a massive ferocious arc, only for Unohana to casually swat it aside with her hand before cutting his neck with her blade. Again, everything looks so cinematic. Against the backdrop of this steely grey, black and white, the blood spurts out as a brilliant jet of ruby red colour. It all looks fantastic. As Zaraki moves in for another attack, Unohana leaps out of the way, pressing her foot onto the side of his blade, as opposed to his hand as it was in the original chapter, before trying to bring her sword down onto him, but Zaraki reacts quickly, twisting round, kicking her in the shoulder, sending her flying into one of the nearby pillars. She pounces off of the pillar and the two lock blades once again in the centre of the room. Already the fight is a visual spectacle and looks totally unique compared to basically every other fight we have seen in the series, and I can't help but think and hope that the next episode will be even more impressive. Their next clash is changed up ever so slightly, with Unohana cutting Zaraki off screen rather than slicing him in the shoulder. Then the two of them actually lock blades a couple more times before they break apart, whereas in the original chapter she slices him once, then they kind of come together for what looks like another clash, but they skid apart instead. We see, of course, once the dust settles, that Zaraki has a massive blade now sticking out of his shoulder, and I just adore their conversation here. Again, basically left totally intact from the source material, but it's stuff like this that makes me love this fight so much. Unohana just casually challenging everything that Kenpachi Zaraki thinks he is, everything that he has been, as we have known him throughout the entirety of Bleach so far. I just love the way she speaks down to him like he's a little child, the way she says, "I see the way you're swinging your sword like that without using your other arm for anything. Are you seriously telling me that you're supposed to be enjoying this fight?" That is so good, because of course it's a clash of ideals. Although they both love fighting, they both love fighting in a slightly different way. What a fight is, what it means to be in a fight, what it means to enjoy a fight, is different for the two of them, and that is the clash of ideals that we get here that works so very well. In response, a disgusted Zaraki says to her, "Look at you, having to stoop to using such pathetic tricks to actually land a hit on me." Zaraki kind of scoffs and says, "You know, you are nothing like the woman I once admired," but Unohana is having none of that, and she screams at him saying, "You know, how dare you admire or even think of admiring an enemy in the midst of battle?" Like she's having to school this little boy all over again on what it actually means to fight, and of course, in the grand scheme of things, what it means to be the strongest Shinigami. As Unohana pins Zaraki to one of the pillars after disarming him, Zaraki's monologue regarding wanting to find a worthy foe and seeking out a worthy foe for so very long is again handled in basically the exact same way. We get most of the same imagery, except here we actually get a full shot of Zaraki as a young child, whereas in the original chapter, this was kept a secret until 525. Honestly, I kind of like both. I think showing young Zaraki here, just for that single shot, is enough to get people intrigued for what's potentially coming next week. Whereas in the source material, I liked that impact of suddenly seeing young Zaraki in the next chapter and thinking, oh wow, I wasn't expecting to see that at all. Because I wasn't, and seeing even a brief snippet of Zaraki's past as far back as this was a lovely surprise and a great addition to an already great fight. But of course, Zaraki sheds a tear as he despairs that he is going to be killed here and now without having ever defeated Unohana whatsoever. And of course, Zaraki is technically, in some ways, misremembering the events of however many years past, because he would have defeated Unohana back then, except of course he places seals on his own power subconsciously. So he thinks that he was defeated by Unohana fair and square, but technically she only beat him back then because he made himself weaker. Regardless, it's a nice and humbling and very humanizing moment for a character who normally just rushes into fights with a massive toothy grin on his face. This is awesome stuff, and I love the new way Unohana stabs him. So of course, in what feels like a cold and callous rejection of his feelings and his emotions, Unohana, with just a statuesque look on her face, shoves her blade through his throat and seemingly kills Zaraki once and for all. Now, in the anime, it might appear to be censored initially, because you don't actually see the blade going through his neck like you do in the original chapter, it just comes out the back of his head. So this feels like censorship until you see the fantastic new shot they add in after this, which shows both of these characters standing face to face, Unohana just casually holding her Zanpakuto as her blade goes right through Zaraki's throat and out the back of his head. Again, both of them looking black and white and grey as the river of red runs down the length of Unohana's blade. It is really fantastic imagery. It looks absolutely brilliant as well. It's definitely more evocative than it was in the source material. And another aspect of this fight that I absolutely love that I haven't brought up yet is the soundtrack. I think it's a brand new piece of music here, but regardless, it works really, really well. It feels kind of electric and action-packed to begin with, but it then changes into more of a sort of subdued melody like that of a dance. There's a romantic tinge here, which of course is one of the major undertones of this fight in general. These characters share that undying love for battle, and no one in the world has ever been able to satisfy either of them like they can. It comes across really well here, and I love hearing that music. It's not what you'd expect from a clash of two essentially bloodthirsty demons, but it works really well to get across that underlying feeling of romance. Of course, it's not as simplistic as simply saying these two characters are in love with each other, because that's not what it's saying. It's saying they share the same love on a totally different level than anyone else for the art of battle, and that no one can make them feel the way the other person does. No one can give them that same satisfaction. I think that comes across really nicely here in the anime, with the addition of that unexpected but nearly perfect soundtrack over the top. And honestly, I'm expecting next week's episode to lean even harder into that imagery of this being basically a dance between lovers, except with the addition of swords and blood. Of course, there's also a nice hint here as to what's actually going on in this fight. Certainly, it looks like Unohana has just finished off Zaraki with one thrust. However, his eyes suddenly widen and he reawakens as though nothing has actually happened. Which is strange until you realise that the blood Zaraki coughed up, some droplets landed on Unohana's face. Those droplets are still there, of course, implying that what actually just happened did just happen. She definitely just stabbed Zaraki in the throat. Somehow he has been revived. And the episode ends really nicely, I think, where they kind of cut to black as we see the episode's title card and we hear Unohana saying that Zaraki has one major flaw that he has placed upon himself, and that is her sin, as the episode comes to a close. That is the actual ending of chapter 524 as well, the drop, and we do get that title card. It's not technically a chapter accurate title card, it doesn't appear in the same place. However, again, looking at the digitally coloured version of the manga, we can see they've used that once again, as the title shares the same colouring and the same lettering between the two. The preview poem this week, as I think it was with episodes 1 and 2, is actually straight from the volumes. It's from volume 59, aptly titled The Battle, featuring Unohana on the cover, and the poem is simply "Battle is everything," basically summing up this character's mantra, her ideology, in a single line. And basically that single line will prove the undercurrent for the majority of the events of next week's episode, also titled The Battle. And so that's it for episode 9, The Drop. Much in the same way as I felt about the art quality this week, I think the actual episode was an episode of two halves. While I did really enjoy the first half, the stuff with the Zero Division and the Royal Palace, I do think the second half eclipses it completely and is just way better. Both artistically, but also the content too is so exciting and well presented here. I'm really happy so far with how this fight is turning out, and I'm hoping they turn it up to 11 next week with a full showcase of this battle. So let's end this review, as we always do, with some predictions for next week's episode, episode 10, The Battle. And I have one big prediction to make. My big prediction is that episode 10 will actually begin with our missing chapter, chapter 522, right the way through to the end of the first half of 523. Basically, I think next episode will begin with the entirety of Oetsu's segment. It'll take us right the way through to Oetsu leaving Ichigo and Renji to face off against the Asauchi before returning us to the battle between Zaraki and Unohana, and presumably the main part of the episode. My main reasoning for thinking this is because there is a gap within this Oetsu segment that is supposed to help showcase the passage of time. Basically, in the original source material, Oetsu leaves them against the Asauchi at the end of the first half of 523. We then have the entirety of the Kenpachi battle before returning to Oetsu in the second half of 527, where he then mentions that we've been away from them for nearly 3 whole days. Of course, this is important because it puts a time on both Ichigo and Renji's training, as well as the length of the battle between Zaraki and Unohana. And so that's why I think they will start next week's episode with the beginning of Oetsu's segment, so they can still have that cut, and therefore still show us the passage of time. Honestly though, if they really want to almost solely put the focus on the battle between Zaraki and Unohana, which might be wise, I think they could pretty easily cut a lot of 522 if they felt the need to. Because let's face it, I hope we get some additional scenes within the Battle of the Kenpachi. As it is right now, the chapters left to cover this fight that will feature in next week's episode are 525, 526, and the vast majority of 527. But I'm hoping for some parts of this fight to be fleshed out, specifically Unohana's bankai. I'm really hoping we get a better, more in-depth and detailed description of what this thing actually does to finally put to bed years of speculation and questions. And I would also really like an extension on their flashback as well, showing slightly more of the original battle between the young Zaraki and Unohana when she was the captain of the 11th Division. I'd love more of that. And while we're asking, I'd also love a slight extension of the scene featuring Kenpachi Kiganjo as well. Hopefully they will leave that scene in, and we'll actually get to see him appear in the anime for the very first time. That would be really awesome, and I would absolutely take actually seeing Zaraki killing him. That would be a great addition. Either way, with the majority of this fight taking place next week, I'm hoping for some truly amazing animation. I would love for it to look like Ichigo versus Yhwach arc, for instance, from episode 7. I'm expecting it to be extraordinarily fast, extraordinarily lethal, like I said, like a dance between two immeasurably experienced duelists. And now I actually think we have a pretty clear indication of how the rest of this season is going to play out. I think there's 13 episodes total, so episode 10 will probably end in one of two ways, but however it ends, it doesn't really make much of a difference. It's either going to end with the very ending of 527, where Oetsu sends Ichigo back to the human world because he's not ready to become a true Shinigami yet without knowing the truth of his origin, or it will end with Zaraki finally speaking to his Zanpakuto. But it doesn't really matter, because either way, episode 11 will be the first half of the flashback Everything But the Rain, which I think people are really excited for. I can't wait to see it. Episode 12 will probably be the second half of Everything But the Rain, because it's big enough definitely to fill 2 episodes. And so episode 13, which I think is the finale of this first season of the 1,000 Year Blood War, will, if I had to guess, cover chapters 539, 540, 541, and probably 542. I could see this first season ending in two potential ways. Either they end it on the massive cliffhanger twist reveal that Zangetsu is in fact Yhwach. Like I have said before, I think this is probably the second biggest twist in the entire series and would absolutely be worthy of ending a season on, leaving us all hanging until the anime finally comes back. Or they will resolve this twist and round out the season in less of a cliffhangery way, I guess a slightly more satisfying way, showing Ichigo gaining his brand new Zangetsu. I honestly think it could easily end in either of those two ways. I really wouldn't be surprised to see either of them, considering that we do get to see Ichigo's new Zangetsu in the opening. I'm more inclined to say we will get the second version of that ending, actually getting to see his new Zanpakuto, meaning I could see the first season coming to a close, fading to black, with that panel of Ichigo closing his eyes and thinking, "You are me," as he thinks about Zangetsu. I reckon that could be the very last shot of our first season. But that's it for the episode, guys. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Did you enjoy it? What did you think of the different elements of the episode as well? Did you enjoy the stuff in the Zero Division? What about the stuff with Kyoraku? And of course, the tentpole sequence in this episode being the battle between Zaraki and Unohana getting started for the main course next week. That's it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already. And until next time, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.